It was a quiet evening in Bristol, just after 8 p.m., when things took a dark turn inside a home. The shouting grew louder, followed by a sudden silence. A young child stood at the top of the stairs, watching what no child should ever see. Someone lying on the kitchen floor downstairs, bleeding. The other person was already trying to hide what had happened. This wasn't just a fight. It was the breaking point of a relationship full of jealousy, anger, and years of warning signs. No one expected that night to end in tragedy, but when the truth came out, it shocked everyone. Abigail White was born in 1998 and raised in Bristol, England. The early chapters of her life were defined not by innocence or joy, but by chaos and abuse. From a young age, Abigail found herself in a home dominated by violence. Her father was abusive, routinely harming her mother. Though her parents eventually divorced, any hope for peace was short-lived. Abigail's mother entered a new relationship, and a new man moved into the home. Instead of stability, the cycle of abuse continued, with the new man creating a similarly hostile environment. When Abigail's mother gave birth to a new child, her stepfather's cruelty escalated. He began abusing Abigail. The trauma was finally exposed. Abigail was removed from the home and placed into foster care, but the damage had already taken root. Foster care was supposed to be a turning point, a place to heal, but Abigail carried her scars with her. School became an ongoing struggle. She had trouble focusing, lashed out frequently, and reacted violently to the smallest disruptions. Her anger wasn't just surface level. It came from a deep place, a defense mechanism forged by years of trauma. She demanded control in all situations, often exploding when she didn't get her way. Eventually, her behavior led to expulsion, and she was transferred to a school designed for students with serious behavioral issues. She briefly lived with her grandmother, but even that environment proved too volatile. Her grandmother couldn't handle Abigail's unpredictable moods. The girl was just 13 when she was sent back to her biological father, an alcoholic who was in no position to provide stability or guidance. Though Abigail made efforts to attend therapy, her pain remained raw. She began drinking, and cocaine followed. She would later say the banned substance were the only escape from the constant darkness in her mind. By 15, Abigail had attempted to end her own life twice. That year, she met her first boyfriend, and it was her first taste of what she believed love could be. For 7 months, she felt some kind of happiness, but once the relationship ended, she spiraled again, and her next relationship would be even more damaging. At 16, she began seeing a 29-year-old man, an age gap that raised eyebrows, but no red flags stopped the relationship. It lasted 2 years, ending shortly after she turned 18. She officially moved into social housing. It was a modest space, but for Abigail, it was the first time she had a home that felt like hers. That's when she reconnected with Bradley Lewis. They had known each other during their school years, but now, as adults, something more grew between them. Abigail was 19. Bradley was 17. Their relationship moved quickly, and they soon welcomed their first child. Over the next 5 years, 2 more children followed. By 23, Abigail was a mother of 3, and Bradley, just 21, worked full-time as a floor installer. Abigail stayed home, raising their children and trying to build a life. But living on one income was hard. Desperate to contribute financially, she began seeking alternative ways to make money from home. That's when she discovered the world of online adult modeling. Abigail launched an OnlyFans account. Her content was bold, provocative, and quickly became a success. Within a year, she earned £50,000. While her income eventually decreased, it still provided a steady income and a taste of validation she had never known before. But money didn't solve her problems. Behind the scenes, her relationship with Bradley was deteriorating. Their home life became increasingly toxic, defined by frequent arguments and violent outbursts, followed by recurring breakups and reconciliations. Neither seemed able to walk away. Despite the mounting emotional damage, Abigail's rage extended beyond the home. In one disturbing incident, she attacked a woman in a nightclub bathroom, convinced the woman had looked at her the wrong way. The victim was severely beaten, and Abigail was sentenced to 12 months of community service. In her daily life, Abigail was controlling, demanding that everything go her way. She issued orders to Bradley, with zero tolerance for disobedience, erupting if he didn't comply. She craved constant affirmation, from compliments to gifts, and any perceived neglect triggered violent confrontations. Her need for attention was insatiable. The relationship between Abigail and Bradley had long ceased to be healthy. What remained was a cycle of fights, betrayals, and emotional warfare. Most days were marked by shouting matches and cold silences that stretched late into the night. Their children were caught in the middle, silently absorbing the surrounding chaos. From an outsider's perspective, the solution seemed obvious: separation. However, neither Abigail nor Bradley seemed ready to leave. Their relationship was characterized by infidelity. Though they were not in an open relationship, both cheated, both knew about the other's affairs, and both reacted with jealousy. Abigail, in particular, demanded immediate responses to her messages. Any delay triggering paranoia that Bradley was with another woman. Ironically, while she was also seeing other men, their boundaries became even more blurred when they engaged in group intimate encounters. Their situation was not merely dysfunctional, it was explosive. Things deteriorated further when Abigail became pregnant and discovered that Bradley had also fathered a child with another woman. That betrayal intensified an already volatile dynamic. Abigail's rage was relentless. Friends and family on both sides urged them to separate before something irreversible happened. Abigail's parents openly despised Bradley, not only for his repeated infidelities, but also for inappropriate messages he had allegedly sent to Abigail's sister. Bradley's family, meanwhile, had their own reasons to distrust Abigail, especially after she stabbed him in the leg during an argument. The wound wasn't life-threatening, but it served as a physical reminder of the turmoil they both refused to escape. Around this time, Abigail's previous assault in the nightclub caught the attention of social services. Authorities ordered a welfare check, concerned for the well-being of the children. The assessment was clear. Abigail and Bradley were living in a toxic and potentially dangerous environment. To avoid losing custody, they agreed to live apart. Bradley moved in with his mother, finding his first sense of peace in years. That brief separation gave Bradley clarity, leading him to seriously consider ending the relationship for good. But when he expressed his doubts to Abigail, her reaction was immediate and severe. She threatened self-harm, an alarming threat given her mental health history. Over time, the threats escalated. She said she would kill the women Bradley had cheated with, the mother of his other child, his own mother, and eventually Bradley himself. By early 2022, Abigail's downward spiral was visible to all. She began posting aggressive and disturbing content on TikTok, airing their dirty laundry with no restraint. She mocked Brad, shared intimate details, and even confessed to violent behavior she had inflicted on Bradley. He felt increasingly trapped. He told friends he feared for his safety, but was too afraid of what Abigail might do if he left. On March 18th, she decided to terminate the pregnancy, a decision Bradley supported afterward. One day later, on March 19th, tensions exploded again. Abigail accused Bradley of cheating, and the fight ended with her stabbing him in the arm. He needed medical treatment, but chose not to report the truth, telling hospital staff it had been an accident. At this time, Abigail messaged a friend, admitting that her relationship had become so dangerous that she believed it would end in one of two ways. Either she would be dead or she would end up in prison. She confessed that she believed herself capable of killing Bradley. Just 6 days later, on March 25th, Abigail and Bradley met in a park for what was intended as a final, honest conversation. Abigail brought a friend, likely to maintain a sense of control or for protection. During the meeting, Bradley told her he was ending the relationship, this time for good. To everyone's surprise, Abigail didn't erupt. She didn't scream or lash out. For once, she remained eerily calm, but with her calmness was never a guarantee of peace. It was often the quiet before a catastrophe. Later that same day, they made plans to meet again. A gathering at a pub was arranged, with a few close friends joining them. Abigail brought their 3 children along. Perhaps trying to project a sense of normalcy, they agreed to meet at around 5 p.m. But when that time passed, Bradley still hadn't shown up. By 5:30 p.m., Abigail began firing off angry messages, furious at his tardiness. Her fury was fueled by the alcohol she had already consumed and further amplified by banned substance. The combination only intensified her volatility. When Bradley finally arrived at 7 p.m., he was met not with a smile, but with raw, seething rage. Abigail had convinced herself he'd been with another woman. Bradley retreated to the restroom with a friend, desperate to decompress and speak freely. There, he admitted how lost he felt and how helpless the situation had become. He no longer knew how to reason with Abigail, but even in that small, private space, there was no escape. When Bradley and his friend emerged, Abigail was waiting just outside the door. She exploded, screaming and accusing them of conspiring against her. Before anyone could react, she lunged at Bradley. In front of stunned onlookers, Abigail launched a violent assault. Bradley's friend tried to pull her away to restore calm, but Abigail spat directly in his face. The situation had escalated beyond control. Fearing further violence, Bradley's friends decided to leave. Abigail and Bradley remained, attempting once again to patch things up. Bradley ordered a round of beers, hoping to de-escalate the situation, but Abigail slapped them off the table, sending glass and foam crashing to the floor. Customers looked on in disbelief. Strangers tried to intervene, hoping to prevent further escalation, but Abigail turned on them, too, throwing a drink at one man and spitting in his face. When the man tried to push her away in self-defense, Abigail fell. She immediately called the police to report an assault, omitting the key detail that she had provoked the confrontation. Her children witnessed the entire ordeal, absorbing yet another violent chapter in their already unstable home life. By 8 p.m., Abigail and Bradley and their kids left the pub. A friend they met outside offered them a ride home. On the way back, Bradley made a comment that would later send chills down the spine of everyone who heard it. "I'm already dead," he said, aware of what likely awaited him at home. And he was right. As soon as they stepped through the front door, the argument resumed, louder, angrier, and more volatile than ever. Abigail blamed Bradley for what had happened at the pub, furious that he hadn't defended her against the man she accused of attacking her. At some point during the shouting, Abigail walked into the kitchen and came back holding a knife. Bradley had seen this before. Blades weren't new to their arguments, but this time she didn't hesitate. In one swift, violent motion, Abigail drove the knife directly into his chest. In the background, their 3-year-old son had crept downstairs, drawn by the noise. He witnessed it all. Both Abigail and Bradley froze. The rage disappeared, replaced by stunned silence. Bradley, bleeding heavily, stumbled back into the kitchen and collapsed onto the floor. But instead of immediately calling for help, Abigail panicked. Rather than grabbing the phone, she grabbed cleaning supplies. She put Bradley's blood-stained shirt into the washing machine. She tried to scrub the floor clean. She didn't want anyone to see what she had done, not even herself. This was the 3rd time Abigail had injured Bradley with a knife, but this time she knew it was different. This wound wouldn't fade into a scar. It was too deep. Moments later, hearing the commotion, a neighbor rushed over. She found Abigail distraught, barefoot, wearing a pink dress and sporting a bruise on her arm, but no trace of blood. Bradley, meanwhile, lay motionless on the kitchen floor. Leaning over him to check for a pulse, she felt the faintest trace of breath. With trembling hands, she began performing CPR while still on the phone with emergency services. The operator instructed her to apply direct pressure to the chest wound. As she did, she noticed something deeply alarming. Very little blood was escaping. This was a terrifying sign of internal bleeding. indicating Bradley's body was beginning to shut down. The neighbor attempted to place him in the recovery position, but he was too heavy for her to move alone. Around 8:22 p.m., her husband returned home and immediately sensed that something was wrong next door. When he entered the house, he found his wife desperately trying to keep Bradley alive and took over chest compressions. Time was quickly slipping away. By 8:48 p.m., police had arrived, already spiraling into hysteria. Abigail called a friend, claiming Bradley had harmed himself. She insisted he had tried to take his own life and begged for reassurance that he would survive. The story had already begun to shift. Moments later, paramedics arrived. Bradley, just 22 years old, was rushed to the hospital and taken straight into surgery. But the damage was too severe. The knife had penetrated very deep, straight into his heart. Despite hours of surgical efforts, doctors pronounced him dead. Back at the scene, Abigail White was arrested. But even during her interrogation, she stuck to a version of events that didn't add up. At first, she claimed Bradley had stabbed himself. She then changed her story, claiming he had wrestled the knife from her. Later, she insisted Bradley had grabbed her hand, which was holding the knife, and forced it into himself. The narrative kept shifting, each version seemingly tailored to avoid blame. Unbeknownst to Abigail, there was a silent witness. Her 3-year-old son had seen it all. Incredibly, despite his age, the child was able to give police a clear and damning statement. "Mommy stabbed Daddy." It was a heartbreaking confirmation of what investigators already suspected. The evidence was overwhelming, and eventually, Abigail could no longer deny what she had done. She confessed, but claimed it had been a moment of passion. She insisted she hadn't meant to kill Bradley, only to hurt him in a moment of rage. But one detail was impossible to ignore. Abigail never called an ambulance. While Bradley lay dying on the floor, she chose to mop up his blood, toss his shirt in the wash, and stage the scene. She claimed she'd tried to call for help, but couldn't get a signal. Yet, she managed to contact a friend to spin a story about end his own life. As detectives dug deeper, they uncovered chilling internet searches made by Abigail in the days leading up to the murder. She had looked up how to tie a noose and whether someone could die from a broken heart. On March 17th, just 1 week before the killing, she also searched for miscarriage-related topics and information about stabbing incidents. In October 2022, Abigail White stood trial at Bristol Crown Court. The prosecution presented a large amount of evidence. This included security camera footage from the pub concerning TikTok videos she posted, voice messages, and over 200 statements from witnesses. Her plea to downgrade the charge to manslaughter was rejected. She was found guilty of murder and sentenced to life in prison with a possibility of parole after 18 years. Psychiatrists testified that Abigail suffers from borderline personality disorder, a diagnosis rooted in the profound trauma of her early life. But mental illness alone couldn't excuse the choices she made. Today, Abigail White remains behind bars. Reports have surfaced suggesting she is in a new relationship. It's a fact that continues to anger many who knew and loved Bradley. Still reeling from the loss, his family expressed what so many felt, that no sentence could truly reflect the life that was stolen. They say they were given their own life sentence, waking up each day to a reality without their son, brother, and father of 3. Bradley's memory, however, lives on. Hundreds attended his funeral, and public memorials now stand in his honor. His kindness, his love for his children, and his enduring popularity are remembered by all who knew him. To them, he is not gone. He is still their son, still a father, still loved, and always will be. June 22, 1980 was a Sunday. Early that morning, 25 years old, Stephanie Malin returned home at around 4 a.m. after finishing her shift as a waitress at a restaurant. Before going home, she stopped by a colleague's house, so by the time she got back, she was very exhausted. Everyone in the house was asleep. As she walked through the first floor, Stephanie noticed her 14-year-old cousin, Suzanne Bombardier, wasn't there. Suzanne usually waited on the living room sofa to greet her, but she assumed the girl must be elsewhere in the house. Despite calling Suzanne's name several times, she got no response. While the situation seemed odd, Stephanie wasn't alarmed. It was too early to search the house thoroughly, and she didn't want to wake her daughters, aged 5 and 6, who were sleeping in their room the night before. June 21st, Stephanie had asked Suzanne to babysit her girls. Suzanne loved spending time with the children and was excited to help. Known for being a responsible and kind teenager with excellent grades and big dreams for the future, Suzanne had eagerly accepted the task. Stephanie assumed Suzanne had fallen asleep in the children's room after putting them to bed. Feeling tired herself, Stephanie also went to bed without checking further. A few hours later, she woke up and began preparing breakfast for the kids. While she was in the kitchen, the phone rang. It was Suzanne's mother asking when her daughter would be coming home. Wanting to ask Suzanne directly, Stephanie went to the children's room, but found that the little girl wasn't there. Her daughters said Suzanne hadn't been in their room when they woke up and didn't know where she was. Growing concerned, Stephanie searched the entire house, from the first floor to the second, but Suzanne was nowhere to be found. It became clear that Suzanne hadn't spent the night at the house. Stephanie was alarmed. Stephanie called her own mother to inform her of Suzanne's disappearance. Both were confused, as Suzanne had always been a responsible teen. She never ran away, had no boyfriend, and certainly wouldn't leave young children alone in the house. Stephanie carefully searched for any clues about Suzanne's whereabouts, but found nothing. Realizing the seriousness of the situation, she and her mother contacted the police. Law enforcement officers arrived and began investigating. They asked when Suzanne was last seen. Stephanie recounted that on the evening of June 21st, she was preparing for her restaurant shift and asked Suzanne to watch the kids. After work, Stephanie planned to stop by a co-worker's birthday party. At around 8 p.m., Stephanie called home and asked Suzanne to bring her some clean clothes to work. Suzanne agreed and brought them. That was the last time Stephanie saw Suzanne. After delivering the clothes, Suzanne headed back home. Stephanie watched her cross the street and waved goodbye. This account was corroborated by Stephanie's daughters and her co-workers. The children confirmed that Suzanne returned home, gave them dinner, and helped tidy up their toys. They also remembered what Suzanne was wearing: a nightgown and a red robe. Suzanne wasn't dressed to go out, which suggested she wasn't planning to leave the house. After putting the children to bed, Suzanne intended to watch TV or read a pastime she enjoyed. She was supposed to spend the night at Stephanie's house and head home the next morning after breakfast. At around 1:30 a.m., while at her co-worker's birthday party, Stephanie called home again to check in. Suzanne answered promptly and reassured her that everything was fine. The children were safely asleep, and Suzanne, feeling tired, was getting ready for bed. This phone call was the last confirmed contact anyone had with Suzanne. Using eyewitness accounts, investigators pieced together a rough timeline of the incident. Suzanne disappeared within a 2-hour window between 1:30 a.m., when Stephanie last called home, and 4 a.m., when Stephanie returned home and realized Suzanne was missing. The police initially suggested she might have run away, but her mother and sister rejected this possibility. Suzanne was calm, mild-mannered, and had no history of conflict with her family or aggressive behavior. Her teenage years were uneventful, and there was no reason to believe she would have left voluntarily. Moreover, her belongings, including her bag, clothes, and shoes, were left behind. It was highly unlikely that she would have run away wearing just a robe and slippers. The possibility of a kidnapping was considered. Detectives theorized that burglars might have broken in and encountered Suzanne, either as an unintended witness or because she attempted to intervene. However, this seemed improbable. No valuables or belongings were missing from the home, according to Stephanie, and there were no signs of forced entry or a struggle. Given the lack of disturbance, detectives speculated that Suzanne may have voluntarily allowed someone she knew into the house or left with them willingly. The lack of any evidence of a struggle or violence in the home everything was undisturbed, added to the mystery. The children sleeping in adjacent rooms heard nothing unusual. Investigators also questioned nearby neighbors in the townhouse complex. Families in neighboring units, who might have overheard something through the walls, reported nothing suspicious. Suzanne's disappearance shocked the quiet neighborhood and became the focal point of concern throughout the district. From the start, the case appeared inexplicable, and detectives struggled to find solid leads. Authorities combed the area around the house and thoroughly searched the premises, but found no new evidence. Neighbors and Suzanne's school community were interviewed, but no one had valuable information. Residents hadn't seen any unusual people or vehicles in the area. That Sunday evening had been an ordinary night, and given the time period, CCTV cameras were not yet common. The lack of surveillance made it harder for detectives to progress, and the investigation hit a dead end. Desperate for leads, police appealed to the public for any information. They received tips from several witnesses, but none panned out. 5 days after Suzanne's disappearance, there were still no breakthroughs or new evidence. Detectives began to suspect the worst, that Suzanne may have been killed, though her family refused to accept this possibility and clung to hope that she would be found alive. In the meantime, Suzanne's family worked tirelessly to spread awareness of her disappearance. They plastered the streets with flyers and distributed them widely. Investigators examined the family's immediate environment, but found no one who posed a potential threat to Suzanne. Her social circle didn't include any troublemaking teens. Detectives also started reviewing the profiles of local criminals with histories of abuse or violent offenses, but each had a verified alibi. The case took a tragic turn on June 27th, about 100 kilometers from where Suzanne lived. A man fishing on the San Joaquin River spotted something unusual in the water. Upon closer inspection from his boat, he discovered the naked body of a girl, washed up by the riverbank near a bridge. The man immediately alerted the police. The body was retrieved and sent for forensic analysis. Although it had been in the water for several days and had begun to decompose, the decomposition was not severe enough to erase all evidence related to the case. The forensic expert determined that the girl had been abused, and her death was caused by a stab wound to the chest. The victim had no identification or personal belongings that could help identify her. Authorities began checking local missing person reports and found one from the Bombardier family that stood out. Due to the warm season and the body's exposure to water, the body had swollen, making identification difficult. Ultimately, dental records confirmed the victim was Suzanne Bombardier. The forensic team collected evidence related to the crime and made attempts to study the perpetrator, but the technology of the 1980s was limited. At the time, there was no database to compare information, so law enforcement could only file the collected evidence and continue the search. Suzanne's disappearance was later classified as a murder investigation, with two main suspects identified: a man with a history of violence who lived near Stephanie's home, and Stephanie's ex-boyfriend, who had been behaving erratically. Before Suzanne disappeared, he had begged Stephanie for a second chance, but left shortly after being rejected. There were no other suspicious individuals within Suzanne's circle who might have had access to her. Detectives carefully investigated both suspects, but found no solid evidence, no witnesses, fingerprints, or anything to directly link them to the crime. Eventually, the leads were dropped, and efforts to find the killer failed. The case materials were archived, leaving Suzanne's murder unsolved for years. 14-year-old Suzanne Bombardier was buried in Lafayette, leaving her family devastated. The tragedy deeply affected her mother, who fainted upon learning her daughter's body had been found. The blow was made even crueler when, shortly after the terrible news, Suzanne's school report card arrived, showing only excellent grades. The community was shaken and outraged by the failure to find her killer. Concerned citizens often called the police station with leads, but none of them proved to be useful. Over the years, investigators tried several times to analyze the criminal's DNA found on Suzanne's body. In the 1990s, despite progress in building DNA databases, Poor sample quality and limited technology hampered the process. By the 2000s, the case had faded from public memory, remembered only by Suzanne's family and community elders determined to see justice served. In 2014, local journalist Jennifer Kathleen Gibbons learned about the case and was shocked that the killer had never been caught and might still be free. She located Suzanne's grave and started blogging about the crime, speaking in depth with Suzanne's family, residents, and retired detectives. Her regular posts reignited public interest in the case, sparking questions about why the killer remained unpunished. Although the police have not given up on the case, Jennifer's posts have increased public pressure, prompting the police to step up their investigation to find answers. In 2015, a newly formed cold case task force revisited Suzanne Bombardier's murder. Several police officers requested the sheriff's approval and resources to address this tragic unsolved case. DNA samples from Suzanne's case were retrieved from the archives, and the team, consisting of dedicated law enforcement professionals, began the challenging work of reviewing the decades-old evidence. Suzanne's case was the oldest unsolved violent crime in Antioch. The timing of the investigation was deliberate, as advancements in forensic technology could now analyze degraded or limited DNA samples, tools that hadn't been available during the original investigation. With renewed hope and determination, investigators sought to finally bring Suzanne's killer to justice. Nearly 40-year-old evidence was sent to the San Mateo County Medical Examiner's Lab, enabling investigators, for the first time, to create a complete DNA profile of the killer. Previous efforts had failed due to inadequate technology, but this time was different. In early 2017, armed with the DNA profile, investigators compared it to a database of registered criminals. To their surprise, the results pointed to Mitchell Lynn Bacon, a major breakthrough in the case. Initially skeptical, detectives conducted additional tests, cross-checking the profile with the FBI DNA database. The results confirmed a match. Mitchell Lynn Bacon, born on March 21, 1954, in a small town near Racine, California. He had lived in Antioch, where he crossed paths with Stephanie and Suzanne. He had long been a suspect in Suzanne's murder, but a lack of evidence had prevented charges until now. In 1973, Mitchell had been convicted of multiple crimes, including assault, and sentenced to 5 years in prison. Though the charges could have warranted life imprisonment, leniency was granted due to his lack of a prior record. After serving his sentence, he was arrested again in 1981 for more violent crimes and received a 24-year prison sentence. His offenses primarily involved abuse. Upon his release, he was required to register as an abuser offender, but failed to do so. This violation led to another 4-year prison sentence in 2002, officially entering him into criminal databases. When police tracked down 63-year-old Mitchell in 2017, he was still living in Antioch. He was arrested calmly as he returned from the store. Despite overwhelming evidence, he denied any involvement in Suzanne's murder. After his arrest, detectives held a press conference, announcing plans to compare his DNA to other unsolved cases. By the time of his capture, he had lived unpunished for 37 years. His methods resembled those of a serial killer, prompting suspicions that he might be linked to additional murders. For Suzanne's family, justice finally seemed within reach. One of the key obstacles to convicting Mitchell in 1980 had been his alibi. He claimed he had been with his aunt at a bar in a nearby town, far from Suzanne's babysitting location. According to him, he left the bar around 2 a.m., stopped at an intersection, visited a convenience store where the clerk recognized him, and then drove home. His aunt and the store clerk both corroborated his story, creating a plausible, albeit tight, timeline that cast doubt on his involvement. This alibi prevented investigators from conclusively linking him to the crime, even though he was considered the most likely suspect. Stephanie, however, had long believed Mitchell was involved in her cousin Suzanne's murder. As someone who had interacted with the family during their brief relationship, Mitchell had earned Suzanne's trust, a trust that tragically sealed her fate. On the night of the murder, she unknowingly let him in, unaware of the danger he posed. Stephanie had ended her relationship with Mitchell after just 3 dates, finding him unsettling. After their breakup, Mitchell began regularly visiting the restaurant where she worked, sitting at a nearby table and silently watching her without ordering anything. His alarming behavior foreshadowed the darker truth that would come to light decades later. Stephanie felt intimidated by Mitchell's behavior and chose to cut off all contact with him. However, he refused to leave her alone. He left notes on her doorstep and repeatedly showed up at her workplace, attempting to reconnect. Stephanie later learned that one of her colleagues had given him her home address. The colleague claimed ignorance of their breakup, but this act put Suzanne in danger and ultimately led to her kidnapping, abuse, and murder. In 1980, during the investigation, Mitchell was offered a polygraph test, which he agreed to take. However, the results were inconclusive. Despite multiple interrogations, Mitchell never confessed, and due to insufficient evidence, he couldn't be definitively linked to the crime. Finally, 37 years later, he was arrested and charged with murder, kidnapping, and abuse. A forensic expert couldn't determine whether Suzanne had been abused before or after her murder. The prosecutor debated whether to pursue life imprisonment without parole or the death penalty. Mitchell continued to deny his involvement in the murder. Ultimately, the prosecution opted for life imprisonment, as seeking the death penalty could result in prolonged legal battles and appeals. In such cases, defense lawyers often file repeated appeals, forcing the victim's family to continually relive the tragedy. Additionally, given Mitchell's age, it was uncertain whether he would live long enough to face execution. Once the decision for a life sentence was made, an official reconstruction of events followed. The prosecution argued that Mitchell coerced Suzanne into leaving her house since she would never have abandoned her young nieces under any circumstances. It was believed that Mitchell threatened Suzanne with a knife, forcing her to leave her home. Her family believed she sacrificed herself to protect her nieces from harm. According to the prosecution, Suzanne was killed with a knife that had a blade at least 15 centimeters long. The blade was sharp enough to pierce her heart with a single fatal strike, causing near-instant death. The prosecution also contended that Mitchell used the same knife to threaten her during the abduction. After committing the crime, he disposed of Suzanne's body. It is believed that Mitchell took Suzanne to a remote location, where he abused her and then killed her with immense force, nearly piercing her body completely. The prosecution argued that Mitchell abused her again after her death. The defense took an unusual approach. They argued, citing a state law that imposes a lighter sentence for abuse of a corpse, that the abuse occurred after Suzanne was dead, and that Mitchell was not involved in her kidnapping or murder. Instead, they claimed he found Suzanne's lifeless body and took advantage of the situation. This argument was strengthened by the lack of evidence proving Suzanne's abduction. There were no signs of forced entry or a struggle at Stephanie's home, giving the defense room to create doubt. However, the prosecution still had critical evidence to counter these claims. Mitchell's criminal history followed a clear and troubling pattern across several recorded incidents. In 1973, he was arrested after being suspected of abuse an underage girl during a burglary. During the investigation, it was revealed that he was guilty of another crime, which led to charges of abuse, burglary, and assault with intent to kill. Following his release, he broke into another home in a different city, where he committed robbery and abused a schoolgirl. During the assault, he tied up the victim, burned her with a cigarette, and stabbed her with a knife. Miraculously, the girl survived. The victim recalled Mitchell's unsettling behavior during the attack. He appeared to enjoy his actions immensely, humming and laughing to himself like a deranged individual. The physical and emotional scars left on the survivor required a long recovery. Prosecutors argued that the similarities between these crimes provided significant evidence linking him to the kidnapping and murder of Suzanne Bombardier. The trial for Suzanne's case was set for March 2022. After Mitchell's arrest, a press conference highlighted the persistent efforts of the detectives who had volunteered to investigate Antioche's oldest case. The police also credited the media's role in keeping Suzanne's story alive through reports published in 2015 and 2016. Authorities stressed the possibility of Mitchell being involved in other violent crimes around the U.S. In their appeal to the public, they urged anyone with information about his involvement in other crimes to contact the Antioche Police Department. They reassured people that Mitchell was now in custody and posed no threat, encouraging past victims or witnesses to come forward. However, no one responded to their call for information. The trial concluded on March 15, 2022, when the jury unanimously convicted Mitchell Lynn Bacon of first-degree murder, as well as other charges such as robbery, kidnapping, and abuse. On June 27, 2022, he was sentenced to life in prison without parole. During his sentencing hearing, a chilling revelation emerged. A former prisoner claims Mitchell confessed to systematically abusing and killing escort girls while working as a truck driver, traveling across the country for years. Authorities are currently investigating these claims to uncover evidence of these alleged crimes. However, Mitchell has denied these accusations, calling his former cellmate's story a fabrication. The search for truth continues as authorities work to determine whether Mitchell is responsible for more atrocities. On April 16, 2024, just after 11 a.m., in a quiet apartment building in Iztacalco, Mexico City, the sun shone brightly and the streets were peaceful. Inside one of the apartments, a teenage girl was finishing her schoolwork while her mother ran a quick errand. Everything seemed normal, but someone was watching someone familiar with the apartment's layout and who had been there before. What happened in the following minutes would profoundly impact the community and reveal a hidden nightmare that had persisted for over a decade. This marked the beginning of a shocking revelation. In April 2024, 17-year-old Maria Jose Castillo Calles was living a peaceful life in Mexico City with her mother, Cassandra Calles. They had recently settled into a modest apartment in the Iztacalco borough. Maria was a kind, compassionate girl with a love for motorcycles and animals, especially her cherished dogs. Neighbors described her as polite, calm, and dedicated to her studies. She rarely went out, spending most of her time focused on schoolwork and preparing for her university entrance exams. Her dream was to study international business, build a successful career, and one day provide financial support for her mother. However, someone had been watching her. Maria Jose and her mother, Cassandra Calles, were unaware that a man had been entering their apartment multiple times. It's unclear whether he used a hidden key or entered through a window, but he clearly knew their daily routine well. On the morning of April 16th, Cassandra left to run errands, not realizing it would be the last time she saw her daughter alive. Security footage later released to the media showed Cassandra walking down the street with the man following closely behind, waiting for the right moment to act. Meanwhile, Maria was in her bedroom doing homework when her stalker walked in. She screamed for help, alerting the neighbors, but he quickly overpowered her and brutally stabbed her multiple times. Cassandra sensed something was wrong and returned home early, only to find a shocking scene: her daughter lying lifeless on the floor, with an attacker still present, assaulting her. Before Cassandra could react, the man lunged at her, stabbing her multiple times. Despite her injuries, she was able to call for help. Neighbors who heard the earlier screams quickly came to assist. Some confronted the attacker, while others helped Cassandra and called emergency services. The police arrived swiftly, rescuing the suspect from an angry mob of residents. Paramedics confirmed that Maria was dead, and Cassandra was taken to the hospital in critical condition. The suspect is Miguel Cortez Miranda, a 39-year-old man who had lived in the same building for over 10 years. On the surface, Miguel appeared to lead a normal life. He was born in Mexico City on October 25, 1984, as the youngest child of a homemaker and a university professor in microbiology. From a young age, Miguel showed both exceptional intelligence and troubling behavior, including experimenting with chemicals on cars, household items, and later, animals. In school, he studied to be a bacteriological chemist and parasitologist, and later graduated from the National School of Biological Sciences and the Instituto Politécnico Nacional. By 2008, he secured a job in a laboratory where he analyzed food and water. He graduated with honors and worked for reputable companies, earning a solid reputation as a professional by his mid-20s. However, hidden beneath his polished appearance was a darker side. Miguel posted on social media images of cemeteries, skulls, preserved animals. He shared unsettling jokes and wrote poetry about death and spiritual pain. In 2014, he transformed into an avant-garde artist, leaving his previous career behind. He acted in independent theater, frequently taking on roles of the deceased, and became active in vegan and animal rights movements. While neighbors considered him eccentric yet harmless, they were mistaken. Investigators made a troubling discovery while looking into Maria José's case. She was not the only victim of Miguel. Authorities conducted searches on 3 properties related to him. In his apartment, they found disturbing evidence: surgical tools, saws, human bones, blood-stained items, and a container holding the remains of at least 20 different people. Along with these remains were IDs and personal belongings, predominantly belonging to women. Even more unsettling were 3 handwritten notebooks, which Miguel had used to detail his crimes. These entries dated back to 2012, indicating a pattern of horror that lasted over a decade. Many of the potential victims were believed to be missing students or escorts associated with Miguel. Over the years, forensic teams began the slow task of identifying the remains through genetic testing. The revelations stunned the nation. Miguel, once seen as an educated, quiet man with a curious mind, was now at the center of one of the most grotesque crime cases in modern Mexico. Leaked pages from his journals hinted at past trauma, including alleged abuse by his father. While some reports claimed his mother and sister ignored his suffering, his sister publicly denied this, though she did acknowledge that both siblings had endured a violent upbringing. In the days following the arrest of Miguel, silence from authorities gave way to a wave of speculation. The media quickly dubbed him the monster of Iztacalco and Dahmer Mexican, comparing his crimes to those of the infamous Jeffrey Dahmer, an American serial killer who murdered 17 young men and kept their remains in his apartment for years without detection. Local officials referred to him simply as the feminicidal killer. As journalists began to investigate further, unsettling details about Miguel's online presence surfaced on social media. He had long been posting disturbing poetry, some of which, in hindsight, appeared to describe his crimes in abstract artistic language. Hidden behind a facade of intellectualism and eccentricity, Miguel had managed to avoid suspicion for over a decade. The most disturbing revelation came when a crime reporter leaked video footage of his first court appearance. In it, Miguel appeared calm, even smiling, as he listened to the charges. During the hearing, he confessed in graphic detail to the murder of Maria José. He explained that on the day of the attack, he believed the apartment was empty. It was not his first time breaking in. When Maria José unexpectedly spotted him, she screamed for help. He claimed he asked her to stop, and when she didn't, something in him snapped. He described entering a state of frenzy and attacking her violently. He also admitted that after Cassandra returned home, he intended to kill her too. Following his confession, the court charged Miguel with the gender-based murder of Maria José and attempted murder for the brutal attack on Cassandra. He was ordered to remain in prison as the investigation expanded outside the courtroom. Grief turned to outrage. Friends, classmates, and neighbors gathered outside the apartment complex to hold a memorial mass and built an altar in Maria José's honor. The call for justice grew louder. Families of other missing women came forward, demanding that authorities identify the remains found in Miguel's home. Soon, long-forgotten names and heartbreaking stories resurfaced. For many, it had been years since they last saw their daughters, sisters, or friends. On May 3, 2024, the Attorney General of Mexico City confirmed what many feared. DNA results had identified several of the victims. Among them were Amirani Roblero Gonzalez, 18, Karen Ornelas Balzataz, 21, Frida Sofia Lima Rivera, 32, Viviana Elizabeth Garrido Ibarra, 32, Claudia Andrea A., 36, Norma Elena O., 41, Cynthia Vanessa E., 39, and Laura V., 33. Each of these women had disappeared at different times over the last 10 years. Their confirmed deaths revealed the massive scope of Miguel's atrocities and raised a terrifying question. How had this predator gone unnoticed for so long? As the media swarmed the story, one victim's identity, Frida Sofia Lima Rivera, was verified by the discovery of her skull. But this was far from the last revelation. Authorities began investigating whether Miguel, using his background in chemistry, had found ways to preserve more bodies. Experts feared that many more victims could be hidden in storage or elsewhere, their identities still unknown. With the identification of known victims, the timeline of Miguel's murders started to take shape. Investigators think that his first verified murder took place in 2012. The victim was Amirani Roblero Gonzalez, an intelligent and athletic 18-year-old who was born in Mexico City on December 26, 1993. Amirani was the third of 4 children in a diligent family. In 2012, she had just finished her studies in business administration and was getting ready to go to university to study engineering. On August 1st of that year, she left home to attend a preparatory course and intended to pick up her graduation photos. She never came back. Her disappearance was reported the following day, but instead of being taken seriously, the authorities dismissed the case. Officers joked that she likely ran off with a boyfriend. From the moment her family reported her missing, crucial mistakes were made. By the time investigators requested it, security footage from nearby cameras had already been erased. Phone records, which could have helped track her last known movements, were not obtained because telecommunications companies did not cooperate. Additionally, the official missing person bulletin had inaccuracies, particularly regarding her age, which caused confusion and slowed down the search efforts. Authorities discovered that Amirani had been in contact with Miguel, who was with her on the day she went missing to collect graduation photos. However, he was quickly ruled out as a suspect due to his reputation as a respected young professional, which seemed to protect him unfairly. While the Amirani's family endured their suffering, Miguel continued to lead a double life. In December 2012, just a few months later, Miguel targeted his next victim, 21-year-old Karen Ornelas Baltazar, a clinical lab technician. At that time, Karen was studying pharmaceutical chemistry at the Instituto Politécnico Nacional. Miguel, who was her supervisor at the laboratory, showed an inappropriate interest in her. Karen brushed off his advances, but her boyfriend felt that something was wrong with Miguel, a concern that would sadly turn out to be true. On December 1, 2012, Miguel planned a surprise birthday party for Karen at his apartment. Friends and co-workers attended the celebration. Not knowing about the plans Miguel had, Karen spent the evening with a few colleagues and decided to go home early the next morning. Miguel offered to accompany her to the metro station but returned alone later that day and did not explain where she had gone. The following day, Karen was reported missing. Suspicion quickly turned to Miguel, the last person known to have seen Karen alive. Days later, her body was discovered. The autopsy determined that she died from bronchoaspiration caused by alcohol intoxication, but her family did not believe this explanation. Karen's body had multiple bruises, which the police attributed to a fall. Her family was left with lingering questions and a growing sense that something much more troubling had occurred. Miguel attended Karen's funeral, where he acted politely and expressed his condolences to her grieving family. No one suspected that the killer was there among them. He managed to keep up his pretense long enough to choose his third victim, Frida Sofia Lima Rivera. Frida was a 32-year-old from a large family struggling financially. She moved to Mexico City to pursue her dream of studying industrial administration at the Instituto Politécnico Nacional. Fortunately, she became neighbors with Miguel. Miguel quickly gained Frida's trust, and their friends noticed a strong bond between them, leading some to speculate about a potential romance. However, Frida viewed Miguel as a mentor who was helping her navigate the challenges of city life and academic pressures. In early 2013, Miguel's behavior changed dramatically. He quit his job at the lab, stopped posting emotional updates on social media, and began focusing on new interests. He adopted a vegan lifestyle, became involved in animal rights activism, and distanced himself from his former friends. By February 2014, after returning from a solitary trip in the mountains, Miguel appeared revitalized and focused, though investigators would later uncover that he was preparing for something much darker. In December 2014, Frida disappeared. Her last known online activity was on December 7th. Due to her family's remote location in Moros, with limited communication, they didn't realize she was missing until February 2015. Frida's sister and their mother went to Mexico City to report her missing. Unfortunately, the authorities were dismissive, suggesting that Frida might have run away with a boyfriend. With no help from the police, her family attempted to search for her on their own, but after several months without any progress and running out of resources, they had to go back home. Miguel, who was the main suspect, pretended to offer support and sympathy while remaining under suspicion. The police did nothing with the only significant clue, phone records showing that Miguel had called Frida's phone number. As time went on, each visit from Frida's family to the police resulted in silence and empty promises, while Miguel continued his life without any interruptions. In September 2018, he began working at a quality control lab, where he met his fourth known victim, Viviana Elizabeth Garrido Ibarra. Viviana was a 32-year-old biochemical engineer and a mother to a 9-year-old girl. She admired Miguel's professionalism, and they developed a connection. However, less than 3 months later, she disappeared. On November 30th, 2018, Viviana said goodbye to a co-worker after finishing her shift and headed to the metro, but she never returned home. Her disappearance prompted serious police investigations, and several of her co-workers, including Miguel, were questioned. Yet, like in earlier cases, he managed to avoid suspicion. Despite his connection to multiple missing women, he remained undetected. This raised a troubling question. Was it due to police incompetence, or had Miguel become an expert at deception? In 2019, a year later, Miguel switched jobs once more and started working at a well-known private hospital's lab. It was there that he reconnected with Claudia Andrea A., a former colleague who would later become his fifth victim. Their professional relationship soon turned romantic, and Claudia frequently shared their happy moments on social media, smiling for the camera, unaware of the horrific fate that lay ahead for her. On December 27, 2019, Claudia disappeared on her 36th birthday after making plans for a celebration with Miguel. Concerned when they hadn't heard from her, her brother and their mother went to her apartment. They found the door unlocked, towels stuffed under the frame, and discovered Claudia's decomposing body in her bed. The initial forensic report indicated she died from respiratory failure, but her family had doubts. The messy state of the apartment, the makeshift measures to cover up the smell, and Claudia's relationship with Miguel raised significant questions. Despite their concerns, the police decided not to investigate further and closed the case. On December 31st, Claudia was buried, but shortly after, suspicious transactions appeared on her bank account between January 1st and 2nd, 2020. Additionally, several of her personal items, including her ID and phone, went missing. This situation led her family to request that the investigation be reopened. Investigators stated they were reviewing security footage, but interest in the case quickly diminished. Meanwhile, Miguel returned to living quietly in his apartment. The indifference of the system became his strongest ally. In April 2024, A violent attack on Maria Jose and her mother, Cassandra, led to a significant breakthrough. The arrest of Miguel revealed his troubling history, prompting investigators to piece together the evidence against him. This development rekindled hope for the families of his earlier victims, who had felt silenced for too long. Cassandra, the sole survivor of Miguel's assaults, slowly healed from her injuries. In interviews with the local media, she recounted her terrifying experience from that unforgettable April morning. By early 2025, authorities projected that Miguel's victim count could be at least 20. However, even with the shocking evidence and public outcry, updates from officials have been rare. The investigation is still ongoing, and a trial date has yet to be announced. The journey toward justice is long and uncertain. For now, families hold on to hope that the man who has escaped justice for over a decade will finally be held accountable. Their voices, once drowned out by bureaucracy and apathy, are now growing stronger. The case of Miguel Ángel Cortez is no longer just about a serial predator. It highlights the failures of a system that has ignored these issues for too long. For the victims, this narrative is not just about their deaths, but about ensuring they are never forgotten. In an unexpected turn of events, on the morning of April 13, 2025, Miguel Cortez Miranda was found on the floor of his cell at Reclusorio Oriente and was immediately taken to Iztapa General Hospital, where he died. His cause of death was ruled to be cardiac arrest due to a prescription drug overdose, aggravated by head trauma when he fell from his bunk bed. Due to his sudden death, Mexican authorities opened an investigation to determine if there was anything suspicious surrounding the incident. At the time of his death, Miguel was scheduled to appear in court and was under investigation for making phone calls to the victim's relatives. Due to his death, investigations into his case were discontinued. The sudden death of Miguel Cortez Miranda may have closed a dark chapter, but it left countless questions unanswered and wounds unhealed. For the families of Maria Jose, Amairani, Karen, Frida, Viviana, Claudia, and others, the loss remains a haunting reminder of a predator who thrived in the shadows of systemic neglect. While their voices now echo louder, demanding accountability and reform, the fight for justice continues, not only to honor the memory of those taken, but to ensure such horrors are never overlooked again. This case, etched in Mexico's collective consciousness, stands as both a tragedy and a call to action, urging society to confront the failures that allowed a monster to hide in plain sight for far too long.